For thousands of years, the culture of ancient Egypt has been admired and coveted. Today, some of the greatest artifacts of Egyptian culture are found thousands of miles away from the land that created them. And that angers Dr. Zahi Hawass.
What they mean to steal these artifacts, to put it in their museums, and they damage the value of the tomb, and they damage a store, and they damage a civilization.
Dr. Hawass is the man in charge of Egypt's antiquities, and he's got a wish list of items he'd like to see come home.
To look at the bust of Nefertiti and the zodiac that shows the sky at the Louvre, and the statue of the architect of the Great Pyramid, Hem-Eono. Every piece that has stolen from Egypt, it should come back.
At the top of his list is the greatest prize, the Rosetta Stone.
It was really my dream to see in a hall at the Cairo Museum, looking at the Rosetta Stone. It is the icon of our Egyptian identity.
The Rosetta Stone, arguably the most important Egyptian artifact ever unearthed. This nearly 1-ton rock is engraved with messages in ancient Greek and 2 hieroglyphic scripts. By comparing the Greek to the hieroglyphs, scholars were able to crack the hieroglyphic code and for the first time understand the meaning of the ancient Egyptian language.
It's an object that's important to all of humanity. It's important for all of us to have access to seeing an object that's as significant as the Rosetta Stone. And I think that's why we feel it's important for it to be based here in the museum.
Hannah Bolton is a spokeswoman for the British Museum, where the Rosetta Stone has been on display for the last 2 centuries.
The Rosetta Stone came into the museum's collection historically when it was originally found by Napoleon, and when he took his archaeologists and invaded Egypt, and they discovered the Rosetta Stone. And when the British beat Napoleon, they took the material that he had collected.
So the British seized from the French what the French seized from the Egyptians.
You're talking about material that's been in a museum collection, particularly in terms of the British Museum, often for over 200 years, 250 years. And therefore it has a history within this collection.
But the history of the object here has been about 200 years. The history of the object from where it came from is about how many thousands of years?
Well, thousands of years, but thousands of years under the sand and buried.
Right.
So it isn't you're not talking about a situation where for 2,000 years, people were able to go and see that object in Egypt.
But now
all
that
of this material is uncovered and excavated, and it's actually only at that point that you start to get this sort of issue of where it should be or where it should be on display, because that's when you've discovered it.
No, I totally forgot.
Gary Vicon, director of the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, believes the question of ownership is complicated.
The English and the French have contributed to what the Rosetta Stone is. The Rosetta Stone didn't come out of the ground with a neon sign on it saying, "I'm important, by the way." It took work. It took knowledge. And that, I think, has to translate into some sense of at least metaphysical ownership.
What if, just say if, Egyptians had invaded Britain 200 years ago. They had found stones, massive stones, and carted them back to Egypt. And there Egyptian scholars discovered what they are, or what we now know as Stonehenge. Would Britain not be right in asking for their return?
I think, again, we come back to this issue about ownership, and I think the then trustees, or the trustees that ended up being set up to run the Egyptian Museum, if you like, would probably use the same argument that the trustees of the British Museum use here, which is that actually, that there is a need and there's a great benefit to having a museum of world civilizations. Because you're able to compare and contrast, there's always new things you can learn, there's always new connections that you can make.
I need one person to come and debate with me, to tell me this sentence, that you keep these monuments outside of Egypt. It has a value. The value of it is in Egypt, not in these museums.
Dr. Hawas's passion may just soon pay off. He's asked the British Museum to allow the stone to be exhibited in Cairo for 3 months when Egypt's new Giza Museum opens in 2012.
We lend many thousands of objects to many hundreds of museums every year, and subject to fitness to travel and conditions and conservation and so on, there isn't any reason why aspects of the collection can't be sent on short-term loan to anywhere in the world.
It will happen one day that these artifacts should be shown here for a short time, like 3 months, and it will happen.
And perhaps this stone that once brought about such understanding centuries ago still has the power to unite people of two great cultures.